So chapter 24 is fairly basic. It covers two things. It covers the structures of certain substances. And so first it talks about the covalent substance fats. I guess they just want you to understand what fats are good for you and what fats are bad for you. So first they talk about unsaturated fats. These are the healthiest fats for you. Pretty much unsaturated means that it doesn't have as much hydrogen in it. So what happens is, with fats is you'll get carbon right here. You'll get a carbon, and then it links to another carbon, and you get a long chain of carbon. And then on each carbon, usually you'll have two hydrogens coming off it. But with an unsaturated, one of these carbons will only have one hydrogen. So what happens is, instead of forming a long straight chain, is these carbons will double bond, and it creates a kink in the chain. And so instead of being in a long straight chain, like we talked earlier about how dispersion forces held them together, since there's a kink in it, it doesn't really have very strong dispersion forces. And that's why these ones are like your fish oils, your olive oil, because at room temperature, the dispersion forces aren't strong enough to hold it together. And so what makes this the unsaturated is the kink in it. So your unsaturated fats are kinky. And the big thing to remember is the more kinks you have in it, the weaker it is. So if you have a bunch of kinks in this, it's harder for it to form dispersion forces because it's all weird and misshaped. Okay? So you have unsaturated, and if it has multiple kinks, it's called polyunsaturated. The next one that's stronger and not healthy for you, this is the stuff you tend to find in butters. It's also what you find in animal fats, and this is saturated fats. Okay? So a saturated fat means it's completely saturated in hydrogen. So you just end up with a long straight chain, meaning without the kink, since it's long and straight, it'll hold together better. So your butters, your animal fats, those will stay solid at room temperature. This also means that when you eat it, it's harder for your body to break down. So it'll get stuck in your blood veins, and it'll make it so you can have heart attacks easier. It'll clot your blood veins, and you can work this off, but it's really hard. The worst one for you is man-made. It is called trans fats. And what happens is they took these unsaturated fats like oils, actually in general tend to be cheaper. So they're cheaper. And so the candy companies, pretty much food companies, they wanted a cheap way to put fat in their candy bars, but also have it maintain a solid structure. Because if they tried to use oils in your candy bar, it would just melt at room temperature, and it'd be, no one wants a melted candy bar. So what happens is they went to chemists, and they asked the chemists to take this fat chain, which is cheap but has a kink in it so it doesn't stay solid at room temperature, and they asked the chemist to strain it out. So what happens is you have this unsaturated link chain here, and then right here it would have a double bond, and then it would have a kink. But what the chemists did is they twisted it around in an unnatural way so it stays straight even though it has that double bond right there. And so what happens is, because of that double bond and it's straight, they stay solid at room temperature. The problem is it's not natural, so our bodies can't break it down. So if you eat something with trans fats, those trans fats are with you the rest of your life. So it'll clog your veins and your arteries, and there's nothing you can do to get rid of it. Okay? So I just want you to understand that unsaturated fats are the healthiest for you. Saturated fats aren't very healthy for you. The longer they get, the stronger they are. It's like dispersion forces. There's a lot more holding this together than this. And then trans fats are your least healthy. Okay? The next structure that matters in this chapter are your silicates. So this is minerals. It's actually a silicate structure. It means it's a silicone and oxygens, and they form a little pyramid crystal. And this silicate structure is like the main mineral for most of the rocks on the earth. But the way they form gives you different types of rocks. So you can have asbestos, which is like a bunch of strings, and it's actually not very healthy for us at all. Then you have mica, which tends to form in flakes, and you have quartz, which is pretty much like a giant rock. So what happens, the main thing you know about silicate structures is because of the way the oxygen forms in mica, they'll form layers, because what happens is you get the silicate structures and they'll form layers. And then you have little ions holding those layers together. Right here it's really weak, so those layers right here that are formed by the silicates, these will hold together really well. But right here in between, the ions, they break easily, so they'll flake off. Asbestos is a little harder to see. What it does is instead of breaking off in flakes, it's kind of like string cheese. So you'll get like one line, and then this line just kind of like peels off. In this one, they show you a weird little structure in it, and they'll like section it out. So right here. And pretty much the main thing that you need to know is be able to look at one of these diagrams and understand that this right here, when you have the weird box forming that, that's asbestos. And if you have the layers, that's going to give you mica. And that's what matters from chapter 24.